Hey guys, welcome back. We're going to jump right into chapter 3 of 1984. So, first of all, one of the biggest things that we're going to talk about here is a dream. And so, when you're reading a book, watching a movie, any sort of media like that, and there is a dream, oftentimes dreams are used to represent some sort of symbolism, some sort of maybe even a prophecy. So really pay attention when you come across dreams, when you encounter dreams in literature and art and stuff like that. They are not meaningless, right? They're supposed to be taken usually symbolically. So keep that in mind, all right? So Winston is dreaming of his mother when we begin in chapter 3, and he's thinking about the past. So this is drawing back on something that we talked about in chapter 2, which is the mutability of the past, or how the party is constantly looking back at the past and changing it to fit what they, to fit their needs in the present. So keep that in mind as we go through the dream. So here we go. He was 10 or 11, Winston was, when his mother disappeared, and it was during one of the great purges of the 50s. And so when we talk about great purges, these are obviously references to, the waves of prisoners sent to hard labor camps and to be executed, whether it was in the Soviet Union or in, Nazi Germany with the Holocaust. Winston had a little sister that he can't remember, but he remembers the sister being with the mom. And so Winston's dreaming that he's on a higher level and he's looking down and he sees the mother with his little sister, and they sink deeper into a hole away from him. Winston, is in light while they are in death. And they are there because Winston is above. So Winston is feeling this kind of survivor's guilt, a guilt that he is alive to tell the tale and they are not, as he watches his family sink deep. What I want you guys to do is think about what could that represent, right? What could that symbolically mean? What would it mean to watch somebody fall into a hole and to feel that survivor's guilt? So we can leave that question open-ended for now, but I'd like you to think about what could that possibly mean. We'll come back to it a little bit later with the family. So, I'm interpreting that survivor's guilt element, which is basically blaming himself for their loss. And there's a lot of discussion about that in the book, that he knew and they knew in the dream, right? They both knew that he was suffering from this survivor's guilt. But it wasn't with hate that they looked at him, right? The family wasn't looking at him above and hating Winston for surviving. They just understood it, right? They knew that it was a necessity, that it had to happen. And so that, that makes me think that, imagine that you're a parent, and, if you're a parent and you're blessed and you're lucky, then you would die before your children, right? That's the natural order that we want things to be in. But imagine knowing that you're not going to just die before your children. Imagine knowing that you must die for your children, right? That you must sacrifice yourself for your child. That's a very heavy parental responsibility, one that many parents, in Nazi Germany, in the Soviet Union, had to confront, and they had to understand that I am going to die, I'm going to be killed, or I have to sacrifice myself just to give my child, a few more days or a better chance at surviving. This, reminds me a little bit of Crime and Punishment, with Rodya, or Raskolnikov, the protagonist of that, and his relationship with his sister, who was, in his point of view, sacrificed so that he could have a better life. But then Winston, in his dream, he's realizing that in the present state of the party, there really isn't tragedy anymore. Tragedy is a thing of the past, because in the past you had love, you had family, you had friendships, you had relationships. But in the current party system, you don't have any of that. There is no love. The family is, a capitalist construction that needs to be torn down. And, you can't have any trust within people. So there isn't really that level of tragedy anymore because there isn't that level of love, right? You need an intense amount of love in your life to face an intense amount of tragedy, if that makes sense. Or you need something to live for, right? So Winston continues in his dream. He goes to the Golden Country, which we're not sure what that means, but you can think about the symbolism of the color gold, right? It's a vibrant place. Maybe it's like a heaven. It's a beautiful place. And he sees a dark-haired girl in the distance in this kind of meadow in the Golden Country. And this girl with dark hair throws off her clothes, right? She strips herself easily, just throws off her clothes. But it's not sexual. Winston's clear to say it wasn't an arousing or a sexual act. More so, he's seeing this symbolism of her throwing off the clothes as a rejection of Big Brother, right? As a rejection of the party, as a rejection of the society that she's in. Almost like, reverting to an animalistic kind of primal nature. And so that is what he loves about this symbol, as he sees the dark-haired girl throw off the sort of yoke of Big Brother. And as he awakes with the word Shakespeare on his lips. Interesting. I'd like to know what you guys think about that and maybe why he awakes with the word Shakespeare on his lips. Definitely something to think about. Okay, so continuing on in chapter 3, the dream is definitely one of the biggest moments, but let's just go through a little more chronologically. There are clothing coupons. So as Winston's getting dressed, right, he's putting on this really old outfit, and that's because you're only given a certain amount of coupons for clothes per year. Everything is rationed in a state like this, where the state controls the means of production, a sort of hyper-communist state. And as he gets out of bed, then the physical jerks begin, which is basically mandatory morning exercise in front of the TV. It's like they make you sit in front of the TV and do this exercise routine, and you have to put on a pretend smile that you're enjoying it because they're watching all the telescreens, making sure you're doing your morning exercises. And the rationale is sort of like, hey, you're here, you're not at the war, you're not fighting on the front. The least you could do would be, to stay in shape for our brothers and sisters who are actually out there, fighting the good fight. Even though Winston has these health conditions, like where he has this chronic cough and he really can't do these things, he's made to do them anyway. Winston, as he's doing the physical jerks, the exercise, he's really still thinking about the dream. He's kind of disembodied, just going through the motions. And so he's thinking about how, what is now called Airstrip 1 used to be called England, and that was in the 50s. So that means everything that's happened, if this is 1984, everything that's happened has happened, within the last 30 years or so. And that, I think, is meant to show us how rapidly things can change. There was an atomic war and everybody hid in the tube station. If you've never been to England, the tube is the subway. So people went down to the subway to hide. And basically since the 50s, there has been continuous war ever since. Now, referring back to chapter 2 and the mutability of the past, the battle lines are changed in this war. The alliances are changed with no acknowledgement from the party whatsoever. So, for example, in the present time, Oceania, which is where Winston lives, is at war with Eurasia and in alliance with Eastasia. But 4 years before, it was the opposite. They were at war with Eastasia in alliance with Eurasia. Now, the problem is that this can't be proven. The only place that this knowledge exists is in Winston's mind, because all the texts, all the records, all the history has been scrubbed and erased, right? This is the mutability of the past. If he brought it up to somebody like, hey, 4 years ago we were fighting those guys with these guys and now we switch. What the heck is going on? If he brought that up, he would be dismissed as, oh, Winston, you've gone crazy. Your memory is flawed. Or, hey, we need to put you in a mental institution because you're losing your mind. All the records were forged to show that, no, everything always was the way it is now. We've always been at war with Eurasia and always in alliance with Eastasia. I think this is something we can relate to even a contemporary society here in the United States, just the idea that the kind of continuous war or the never-ending wars and the shifting battle lines are oftentimes nonsensical, or they don't kind of logically follow. Like, wait, we just gave all of those people arms in the 70s and now we're fighting against them in the 80s. Like, what's going on? This isn't making our military intelligence look the most favorable. So I think we can draw some parallels to our own society there. Now, here's an excellent quote for all of you who are fans of Rage Against the Machine. You've probably sung along with this quote and maybe didn't realize it. But the party slogan, so we've heard many party slogans at this point, most of which are in Newspeak or double speak, right? This party slogan is, who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past. So let me say that one more time and let's really think about that. Who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past. So there is this self-fulfilling prophecy within this statement, this feedback loop, that whoever is in power now at the present, right, they get to decide what the past was. So in this case, the party gets to look back and say, oh, we've never been at war with East Asia, right? We've always been at war with Eurasia, even though 4 years ago it was the opposite. They have control over the history textbooks that go to our children, right? They have control over the press that goes out to the people to tell them what's going on. And so Orwell's claim here, I think, is that if you can control the past, you can control the future. Okay, and this goes back to chapter 2 in the mutability of the past, which is, I think Orwell would say that the past, we need to do our best to document the past and keep the past fixed to what it was, right? And know that people are going to try to look back into the past and change or alter narratives to fit their ideology so that they can implement their ideology into the future, right? People need justification, and we already know this with research and confirmation bias. If you want to prove a point, you can go onto the internet and find somebody who agrees with you and say, look, I found evidence. See, I'm right. But really all you're just doing is confirming what you already thought in the first place, right? And so there's a similar kind of effect here with, if you can go back into the past and make an event in the past fit your narrative or your ideology, then you can push that ideology into the future. And so Winston is thinking, as he's doing his exercise here, that if I die, then the past could die with me, right? Because the only place that the knowledge of, hey, we were at war with somebody different 4 years ago, the only place that knowledge exists is in Winston's mind, and maybe some other people out there, but he hasn't met them yet, right? Like, he's like, oh, maybe O'Brien's on my side. I'm not sure yet. But as far as he knows, he's the only guy that is thinking about this stuff. And so he's thinking to himself, if I die, the past could die with me. And if everybody else accepts the lie that the party feeds them, then the past will be dead. And if the past is dead, that means a party or an ideology can come in and rewrite it to fit whatever narrative they see fit. And this is, the essence of doublethink, he says. And I'm going to read you guys a quick quote before we finish up chapter 3. In my book, Signet Classic Edition, this quote is on page 35. And the idea is about doublethink or reality control. And so I know we've been talking about the mutability of the past, but doublethink is one of the most important concepts of this book that we need to make sure we get. So I'm going to read you a quick quote here. Page 35, Winston says, his mind slid away into the labyrinthine world of doublethink. To know and not to know. To be conscious of complete truthfulness while telling carefully constructed lies. To hold simultaneously two opinions which canceled out. knowing them to be contradictory and believing in both of them, to use logic against logic, to repudiate morality while laying claim to it, to believe that democracy was impossible and that the party was the guardian of democracy, to forget whatever it was necessary to forget, then to draw it back into memory again at the moment when it was needed, and then promptly to forget it again, and above all, to apply the same process to the process itself. That was the ultimate subtlety, consciously to induce unconsciousness, and then once again to become unconscious of the act of hypnosis you had just performed. Even to understand the word doublethink involved the use of doublethink. And so I think that is an excellent passage to explain doublethink. And if you're listening to me say that and you're like, wait, I don't get it, none of that made any sense, that's kind of the point, right? The point of doublethink is that you can hold contradictory ideas in your mind that don't make sense and believe them both to be true. And it's a ideological move that you have to make in your mind rather than be confronted with facts that go against your preconceived beliefs, right? And one of the best lines here about the mutability of the past that I think we can connect to our current society is this idea of forgetting whatever is necessary to forget and then draw it back into your memory the moment when it's needed and then forget it again. So there's an idea of expediency, which Solzhenitsyn does a great job explaining in Gulag Archipelago. Expediency is basically, using whatever methods, moral or not, using whatever methods can give you the result that you want quickly, right? And so if that involves forgetting things that happened in the past, so be it. But if at any point those things in the past are necessary to advance your ideology, you quickly call them back and say, well, look at this thing that happened in the past, right? But if that contradicts something else in your ideology, then you can immediately forget that again and say, I don't know what you're talking about. That was in the past, right? That doesn't apply. So I'm curious if you guys want to reread that quote on page 35 and make some connections and let me know what rings true to you in that statement and what you can connect in that statement to our current society or past societies or anything like that. So to wrap up chapter 3, Big Brother came about in the 60s. So that means it's only been, max 25-ish years to the present that everything has happened in London. That's expediency, right? There were some expedient things that had to happen to make that change so quickly. Last couple minor details. We see the imagery of capitalists with top hats, and that's reminiscent of the Soviet imagery. I'll show you guys some Soviet propaganda posters, but if you just go on Google and type in Soviet propaganda capitalist or something like that, you will see how capitalists are often portrayed as fat pigs with top hats, and it symbolizes their greed. Finally, we learn what INGSOC is. It's an acronym that is meant to mean English socialism. So just keep in mind as we're reading, Orwell is a devout socialist, right? He is not a fascist, or he is not a far right person or anything like that. He is a socialist, as you can see in some of his other books like Road to Wigan Pier, where he goes and meets with people to try and understand the plight of the working class in London at that time. But something that makes Orwell great is that, he felt it was his responsibility as a socialist to critique things that he saw as weaknesses in the movement at that time. And so he is still able to critique aspects of socialism. And so I think that's why he's referring to the party or Big Brother as English socialism, because this is kind of something he sees as an inevitability of socialism when it's advanced too far in one direction. Winston knew, this is my last detail of the chapter, referring to the mutability of the past, there were some things that Winston knew that were not true about the party's historical rhetoric, right? The party claims that they invented airplanes. And Winston knew that wasn't possible because when I was a child, before the party was around, there were airplanes. But again, he doesn't have the physical proof. The only proof is in his mind, and that can be easily dismissed by society. So, think about how would you act in that situation? What could you do to try and persuade people that, hey, this isn't true, at the risk of pointing yourself out as somebody who's potentially crazy or a thought criminal. Then at the very end of the chapter, Winston says, one time he had actual proof of a party lie, and then he gets cut off. So this is undoubtedly a cliffhanger for the next chapter, right? It's a tool of the author to keep us reading, keep us engaged. So good job, Orwell. And we'll pick up on chapter 4 in a little bit.